All right. Well, here we are with another episode of American Legacy Podcast. We'll slide that over to you. And I'm your host, Phil Henry, and we have a special guest today, Lindell Yank Rutherford. Today's guest is someone whose career reads like a blueprint for elite leadership. Rear Admiral Lindell Yank Rutherford served more than 3 decades in the U.S. Navy. He flew over 4,200 hours, including 2,500 plus in the legendary F14 Tomcat, graduated from Top Gun, commanded multiple aviation squadrons, ran an aircraft carrier, and eventually led an entire carrier strike group. After retiring, he stepped seamlessly into executive leadership roles, supporting advanced technologies for the next generation of U.S. aircraft carriers. He's a husband, a father of 3, a grandfather, and he's a man whose life is a masterclass in discipline, courage, and service. Admiral Rutherford, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
So you logged over 4,200 flight hours, more than 2,500 of them in the F-14. What's the biggest leadership lesson the cockpit taught you that carried you into every role after that?
Well, I think aviation, and I know from your experience in aviation that it's a skill really, and it takes every day doing it better. And that's kind of my philosophy in flying, and it was kind of my philosophy all the time I was in the Navy was, I need to know more about the airplane and fly it better than everybody else in order to, to survive in the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's this everyday improvement type philosophy.
Right.
And it's easy to relax in the air and become complacent about what you're doing. And I tried never to do that. And some of the airplanes that I flew were not very, they didn't allow you to do that anyway. You had to pay a lot of attention to what you were doing.
Yeah.
But I think that's the biggest issue. And then the other thing that I think is really important, and this was one that naval aviation prides itself on, and that is awarding people responsibility regardless of rank or regardless of their position in the organization based on talent.
Mm.
And the carrier, I learned that in spades. People used to ask me, well, it must be really difficult, to be the leader of the carrier. And I said, not really. I said, I have these guys that work for me that they're really the guys that are doing this.
That are competent
yes.
Yeah, right.
And learning to pick the right people and then to give them the authority they need and the responsibility they need to conduct their business and then depend on.
Right.
And that in an organization that large, carriers got about, well, they're a little bit smaller now, but there were about 5,000, 5,500 people. You couldn't do it yourself. There were too many things that had to be done. So you had to delegate authority and responsibility and then hold people accountable to that.
I mean, that's a whole art form, imagining people having leadership in different places that are responsible for certain stuff, and then having that reporting or metrics in place to be able to at least measure the success of what they're doing. Yeah.
And everybody says that, and it's really a true statement. It really is not the leader necessarily. It's the people that do the work. Mm-hmm. And once you recognize that and start to, create a culture where they feel responsible. One of the stories that's kind of an interesting story after the collapse after the Cold War was over, one of the fleet admirals from the Russian Navy came over to the United States, and I was at one point the XO of Theodore Roosevelt, and the previous XO was a friend of mine and had been a squadron mate of mine. And so this admiral came over and on the Theodore Roosevelt, and he did a tour.
Okay.
And the CO, who was a neighbor of mine in Virginia Beach of the carrier, he had a great plan. I didn't recognize the wisdom of it until after it was over, but he said, no officers are going to talk to this guy. It's just going to be the enlisted people. So when we went around the ship and we went to all the places on the ship that are interesting, the magazines, the combat centers, the squadrons and everything, everybody he talked to was like an E5, an E5 enlisted sailor. And those people are really impressive. And when it was all over, he was asked kind of an informal way of, what did you think of the carrier? And he says, well, the magic of this really, I don't know if you used that word, but what makes this so great is the caliber of the people that operate it. It wasn't the ship. I mean, seen ships, he'd had ships, he'd been on ships. They're all the same. You know, they have systems and whatever, but it's the people that make the difference. And I thought that the CEO of that ship was very smart in understanding that and making it a point, and he did that.
And making that a point of showing this guy coming in. Yeah, that's wild. I always think, like, you know, when you decided to, like, head in that direction, it's kind of let's be honest, it's a bit of a lofty goal to say, you know, I think I'm gonna my goal is to fly. I want to fly F14 Tomcats. So for you, like, what possessed you to go down that path? Was it like, were your parents kind of, pushing you in that direction? Did you just have some, like, I'm curious of where that came from.
Yeah, and I don't really know.
Okay.
I would tell you that I met people in the Navy that came out of Navy families. You know, their father went to the Naval Academy, their grandfather went to the Naval Academy, their father had been a pilot in World War II, and, you know, they had that kind of a lineage. And those guys, you know, they kind of knew that that was kind of where they were destined to go. That was not true of me. My father, I grew up in a small town in Missouri. I mean, a rural town, 3,000 people, and my father had been in World War II in the Army, but I had no exposure to the Navy whatsoever and never really gave much thought to flying, honestly. So what happened was I went to the University of Missouri at Rolla, which had been a Missouri School of Mines school. It was a heavy engineering school, and I was in an engineering curriculum. And near the end of I think it was my junior year, I was going through the student union, and there were a couple of naval aviators there in their white, choker white uniforms with gold wings and all that. And they were showing, if you remember the old projectors used to have it set on the top of the table. This may have been before your
Where you have the slide, where you have the.
well, it wasn't a slide, it was a movie, but it looked like a little TV set, but it was actually playing an 8 millimeter movie. So they had this flick they were showing, which was Phantoms landing on an aircraft carrier. So my friend and I were going through there, and we stopped and watched that. And I said, that's really cool. I'd like to do that. And of course, they were quick to set us up with a recruiter, and we both signed up to go get recruited and to go to get the physical. You had to pass the physical for aviation.
Of course, yeah.
And so that's how I got started. And when other guys were going off to their job in engineering, I went to Pensacola down to Aviation Officer Candidate School, which is kind of a boot camp for guys that have never been in the military. And then I went and
as a graduate engineer at that point. Yes. Okay, so you finished your degree. You had to finish that. Then you were okay. Got it.
Yeah, you have to have your degree first. So, but as I went through the Navy, I mean, I never ever sat down and said, I want to do this. I want to be a squadron CO. I want to fly the F-14. It was kind of like I said, this is fun. I enjoy what I'm doing, and I'm going to keep doing it until it's not. And those opportunities just sort of presented themselves. I mean, I went along and I got my wings in 73 in T-34.
Okay.
And then I went to advanced jet down in Texas, flying the A4.
Okay.
And then I got orders out to San Diego, flying the A4 out in San Diego. And that was 1973 when I got there. And that was the end of the Vietnam War, really. So the base at NAS Miramar in San Diego, it was sort of populated by all these guys that just got back from combat cruises. A lot of one of my good friends had killed a MiG air to air, and there were the only aces that existed in the Navy were in our squadron area all the time. So I kind of got to meet those guys. I never flew any of those missions, of course, because I was just a student. But anyway, so that sort of got me energized to, I want to do the next thing, which was go from the A4 to the F4. And then I transitioned to the F4 at Miramar. And then I ended up in my first squadron, deployed on Franklin D. Roosevelt and going to the Mediterranean.
Wow.
So.
Wow, that's wild. And so, because I'm reading here, like, you completed Top Gun in 1979. Mm-hmm. So what separates an elite fighter pilot from a good one, and how have those distinctions shown up later in your leadership career?
Well, there's kind of a story that goes with it. When air-to-air missiles became kind of the thing in naval in aviation,
mm-hmm.
there was a thought this was in the 50s and early 60s that we'd never do air combat maneuvering, one airplane against another.
Got it.
That had been done in World War II and in World War I. And because we had these missiles that could go, 12, 13 miles, and you say, well, we'll never see these airplanes. We're just going to kill them from a distance, and we'll never be in the arena with these guys.
Right.
So when the Vietnam War started, the Russians actually had better turning airplanes than the Navy did. I mean, the F-4 was our primary airplane. It was not a very good turning airplane. It was a terrible turning airplane.
Okay.
And the Russians, who were the enemy at that time, had really good airplanes. So we took a lot of combat losses. And so Top Gun was a spinoff of that. The guys that came back said, we don't really know how to fly this Phantom against these little nimble, tight turning airplanes. We need to have a school, like a graduate school, on how to do that. So that became Top Gun. And the first instructors were all kind of aces. They'd had combat experience. In fact, when you walked into their hangar down the stairway, they had all these MiG silhouettes with, the dates and who had shot those down. There was a whole wall of them. So these guys were pretty impressive. And so Top Gun was really a kind of a master's degree in air combat maneuvering. So the Navy's philosophy was we couldn't train everybody that way. It was too expensive. So after I transitioned, I made a first cruise in the Phantom and then came back and transitioned to the F-14 at Miramar. And we were waiting to go on our next deployment. I was in VF-111, the Sundowners, the squadron from World War II.
Okay.
And we were waiting to go in there. So they said, well, we're going to take a crew and send it to Top Gun. And I was selected to go do that. And it's about a 6 or 8 week course of pretty detailed day-to-day, how to tactically maneuver your airplane. Now, in this case, it was an F-14, but it was against these adversary airplanes that simulated the threat airplanes. There was the A4, F5s, F-16s that played aggressors and simulated. So you learn kind of the fine arts of how to do that. So then the idea was that when you went back to your squadron, you were going to be the tactical kind of lead for all those pilots that were had not been able to go.
Okay.
And we had training exercises to work up the squadron through those kinds of training prior to each deployment. And Top Gun graduates were sort of the guys that were, not that we were any smarter than anybody else, but we'd had the training, so we were involved in the training of those.
Okay, guys. So it was like a train the trainer. So you're
Exactly.
in there. You got all the lessons. You have some fine tuning that others have not had experience to do, and you go back and you're trying to elevate the game of the squadron,
And
essentially.
It's still that way. The Navy does it the same way.
Same way. Okay, interesting. Now, what do you think separated? Well, why do you think they? Because I mean, your philosophy of just always like enjoying what I'm doing, be curious, be inquisitive, trying to learn more. Obviously, that advanced your career to the point where it kind of led your career naturally because you just kept learning and following the path that was natural. What was the reason, do you think, that they selected you out of the squadron to go to Top Gun school?
Well, there were a couple of things. I mean, I guess they thought I was an average pilot at least, and I also had the opportunity. It really depends on time. A lot of things that happen to you in the Navy are based on timing.
Okay.
So it wasn't like I was the guy that they said, no, we got to send this guy to Top Gun. It was the fact that I was available. I had completed training in the F-14. I was going to make the next deployment, and I wasn't a danger to myself when I was in the cockpit. So they said, send him to Top Gun. And of course, once you have this training, you maybe do have a better grasp of those basic fundamentals.
Right.
So it's just like everything else. You get the opportunity, and if you take advantage of it, then you have some skill set that allows you to advance. Perhaps maybe that's what.
Okay.
But
makes sense.
But that's why they selected me.
Okay. And then it said you eventually commanded the USS George Washington and later a carrier strike group. What mindset shift was required to move from leading a jet to then leading 5,000 men?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. I would have thought, particularly most of the way through my career, if somebody asked me what was the best thing you did during your career, I would say, well, flying F-14s was that was the thing, because it was the newest airplane and everybody wanted to fly it. So that would be, that was an achievement that I was very proud of. but it doesn't rank really with carrier command. So what happened to me after a squadron XO and CO tour? I was in the Ghost Riders. I had the Ghost Rider Squadron, and at the end of that, I was assigned to a air ops job on the Theodore Roosevelt, and we went to Desert Storm.
Okay.
So I flew some in Desert Storm, not a lot, but a few sorties in Desert Storm, and I was selected to go to be a CAG, which is the commander of the squadrons on a carrier.
Okay.
There's a commanding officer for each squadron, and then there's a guy that's in charge of all those commanding officers, and that's the CAG.
Okay.
I was originally selected to do that, which I really wanted to do because I was going to get 1,000 traps, which I only got 950 or so traps, and I was going to get
What's a trap?
a carrier landing.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So in the Navy, they keep track of your carrier landings, and to actually progress in command, you have to have a certain number. I mean, it's not
Like it's a prerequisite.
Yes.
Like you have to have so many to be even qualified for this position. Okay.
Yeah, like for squadron command, if you can't get on and off the boat without harming yourself, you're not going to be a CO of a squadron.
Yeah.
So they keep track of how many carrier landings you have and what experience you have on a carrier. So anyway, I wanted to get 1,000 traps and I wanted to get 3,000 hours in the F14. And I was going to do that if I was going to be a CAG. But while I was at Desert Storm, I was an 05. I was a commander. They decided that CAGs were going to be 06s, not 05s. And I was an 05. So I selected for that. And they called me up and they said, well, yeah, but you can't do that because you're not a 06, you're an 05. So what do you want to do? And I said, well, I don't really know. What can I do? And they said, well, really the only thing you can do at this point is go to nuclear power school for training for the carrier. Well, that is about a 6-year program.
Wow.
That begins with a school in Orlando, Florida, where you learn about neutrons and atoms and uranium and things like that, how to run, how a reactor works. And then you go to Charleston and you operate a tethered reactor on a ballistic missile submarine that's tethered down there in the river. And you actually operate it and get a license to operate the plant. And then you go to a kind of a knife and fork school in Washington about how to behave like a commanding officer of a carrier. And then you go to be the XO of a carrier. And the XO is the number 2 guy on the ship, and he basically runs the day-to-day operations of the ship.
Okay.
So the perspective is that as a carrier CO, you had these guys working for you that did most of the stuff. When you go to be the XO, you're running all that stuff.
I got you.
So
So
the
day-to-day.
XO really is like the day-to-day operations, which really is a pretty intense job.
He's responsible for, I would say, most of the daily function of the ship. The CO sits up on the bridge. He monitors flight operations. He's in tactical command of the carrier. He's doing the interface with the admiral and his staff, which is on board. So he's doing that stuff, which is a job, and navigating the boat,
100%.
making sure you don't run aground and that you don't run into somebody and all those things. So he's doing
the decision maker in terms of strategy and all that, and the XO is like does all the operation, makes sure this thing is running like a top, and
make sure we got the right food in the galley, that we run the fire drills, that we train the crew the way we're supposed to, and do all that stuff. So he does all that. And so there's a real marriage between the CO and the XO.
sure.
The good thing about it is that if you do select to be a CO, and about half the XOs become COs, the selection rate's about half to CO. Once you get there, you've been running a carrier.
100%. What a benefit that is. You've lived the XO role, so to be a CO, you're like I lived in that role, so I know the challenges, I know what the guy's up against or gal. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And I think that's another thing about leadership that you spoke to. In order to be successful, I think you have to live a day in the shoes of the guys that you manage. If you look at it that way, you have to know the difference between somebody that's telling you what's really happening and what they wish would happen. And the only way you can do that is to have lived in their job and understand what their responsibilities are and what their challenges are, and whether they're telling you squarely what's happening or not. And the way you do that is to go down and actually do that job.
Yes.
So I think the way the carrier command passes, it really works very well because the XOs fleet up to be COs, and they've done that. They know how the carrier runs. Now they're ready to be the commanding officer of the carrier and actually, work with the admirals, the embark staff, and the air wing that comes aboard and actually run flight operations at sea. So
I think that's a good lesson for leadership in general. I think that it's I think it works both ways too, because the XO, right, has, I think, a much more respect, and whether it's respect or whatever you want to call it, but for the CO, if he knows that you've been here, you know what I'm dealing with day to day. Whereas if you're getting commands, or a lot of times you're being told something that it doesn't really make sense for my role, it's hard to really buy in on that from the XO's or from anybody's perspective. If you haven't been there, done that, and because I think when you're doing something, you want to know why I'm doing it. I mean, I'll do it, but when you know why you're doing it, it makes it a lot easier to execute, I think.
In the U.S., Title 10 law says that the commanding officer of an aircraft carrier has to be an aviator.
Okay.
And they're all carrier aviators. They've all been on the ship, and they all wear wings. And one of my close friends told me the story, which is going in the same direction you were going. If somebody did something really colorful around the boat, flying off an aircraft carrier is kind of an interesting thing. Every landing is recorded on film. Every landing is debriefed. You do it in front of the admiral, the captain, and everybody on the ship that wants to turn on the TV and watch. So it's not something you do in the dark. I mean, everybody knows. So when somebody does something particularly colorful around the ship, they might get an invitation to go up and see the captain. And so these guys would come up, junior guys, young guys, like we all had been.
Oh, yeah.
And the carrier the CO might ask them something about, well, how did you let that happen? How did you
miss here?
How did that work? And so they would tell some wild story about, well, this, Captain, I'm a pilot, and one of my close friends said he always wanted to do this, to take his shirt and say, you see these wings? Yeah. You think I just got to this chair? You think I don't know that what you're telling me is crazy? That's not right. That's not right.
You missed step 4, 6, and 8. And now you're telling me, yeah.
So it was kind of an interesting, and in fact, I think it's important because it leads to where you were going with this idea of credibility. You have to have credibility, and if people that work for you don't think you don't have credibility, then it doesn't work.
Right.
And the only way you can do that is to kind of progress through those jobs. And the Navy's very good about doing that.
It is really interesting. I mean, I find that, you think that it's such a process based, and then they've obviously gone through so many versions of trial and error to optimize that entire system so that it because, again, it's one of those things where it's like critical operation. You're at sea in aircraft. You can't have, the thing can't not move, or it can't, everything is covered, and there's redundancy everywhere. There's backup plans. There's backup plans for backup plans. And it's really, and especially when you're dealing with nuclear power, right? I mean, as you know, I mean, it's kind of wild. You finish engineering, you do all this training to fly airplanes, and then they tell you that your only option is to go back to school for 6 more years, essentially to, master the art of nuclear generation and operation and all the stuff that goes with that. It's a pretty intense ask after going to engineering school, doing that.
Well, and it turns a lot of guys off because you've had your squadron tour, so it's kind of the pinnacle of the flying jobs. You've been the CO of a squadron, and a lot of guys make a decision to leave the Navy at that point. And if you offer them, because they're at that point, you're probably in your 40s. You've had 20 years in the military. You can retire. Mm-hmm. So this extra stuff, going off to nuke power school for another 6 years, stay in the Navy through 32 years, like I did. I mean, that's a whole nother decade. Really? And a lot of guys wanted to get out. The attractive part there is probably civilian pilot aviation, because they make great inputs to that system because they've got combat air experience. Right. So a lot of guys don't want to do that, and they say, and plus, you go to nuke power school in Orlando. That was unaccompanied. Marcia and the kids didn't go, and then you go to Charleston unaccompanied. Family's not there. Then you go to be the XO.
Huge commitment.
Yeah, you go to an aircraft carrier, and we deployed. I was there 30 months, and we did a 6-month deployment. In front of a 6-month deployment is about a 6-month workup where you're gone about half the time, and then you're gone for 6 months.
6 months.
And then after Carrier XO tour, I did a deep draft tour, which is learning how to drive a ship all by yourself. And it was a fast stores refueling ship that I ran for about a year and a half. That's unaccompanied. And then you get carrier command, and same thing again. I made another deployment as the CEO of the carrier. So there's a lot of time away from home, time away from kids and family, and a lot of guys say I'm not interested in doing that, or I don't. Right. I'd like to do that, but I don't really want to do it. So they say no, I'm done.
I'll head out to civilian life and roll my dice with a retirement package from the Navy. Yeah. Well, speaking of that, because one of the things that I find, like, when you have a big role, or you're building a business, or you're in an executive role, or whatever the case may be, but you're trying to do the best you can. You're doing stuff that you enjoy, but at the same time, you have a wife and 3 kids. What did you find the most challenging about dealing with that, and what do you think you did, or you and Marcia did, to compensate for your time away and the challenges that go with that?
I think there's a couple things there that are important. One is that your wife has to be as happy with the Navy as you are. And a lot of the people I knew that left, it's because their wives were very unhappy with being in the Navy in these long separations. So your wife has to be on board with this to begin with. And then they pretty much have to run things. I mean, when you're gone, you're gone. And Marcia has some very funny stories about, buying a new lawnmower, and the car won't start, and then of course when the kids were older and driving cars, collisions and that kind of stuff, they have to take care of all that. And what's kind of interesting about that is that when I first started, the only way to communicate was by letter. I mean, now they can do it by text,
Or you can
text,
FaceTime.
yeah, FaceTime, do all
Yeah.
stuff off the ship. But back when I started, it was a letter. You'd drop in the mail, and it'd take it 10 days to get to the States, and then if she wrote back, it'd be 10 days coming back. So it's you almost forgot what you were talking about.
That's true.
And an occasional phone call from overseas when we were, on Liberty. But other than that, they have to basically your wife has to kind of run things.
Right.
And they become very independent.
Right.
So one of the big problems that happen in the Navy quite frequently is, the guy's been on cruise, he's been the CEO of a carrier or whatever, telling people what to do.
Right.
He comes home, his wife's been telling the kids and running the place, and he comes in now, he's telling everybody what to do, and that doesn't go over very well. So it's stressful unless you have this relationship that allows that kind of thing to happen. And also, it depends on the personalities of people.
Yes.
Marcia and I got along well, and we never had really, I don't think, any real issues with that. But there's a lot of people do.
Oh, no, most definitely. I mean, I can tell you. I mean, that was the biggest challenge I didn't travel nearly as much. But when I'm on the road Monday to Friday, and your wife's handling everything, she's the decision maker. She's telling the kids when to go, where to go, and then when you come home as the dad to integrate back into that life, and you're like, I'm the dad. I run the show here, and especially if your job, you're the boss at the job. This is how it goes. This is what I'm doing, and they look at you like, where did he come from? And what are you talking about? We listen to mom. We don't listen,
Yes.
So it does take some time to kind of work through all that so that you can kind of make sure that you're aligned as parents, talking to your kids or teaching them something, or if it requires some discipline or whatever. But so you led teams through combat operations in Libya and Desert Storm. What does calm under pressure actually look like at that level?
Yeah, my position when I was in Desert Storm, I was part of Air Ops, so there was a whole staff, it wasn't just me, and it is different because it's real operations. In Libya, I was not part of the leadership. I mean, I was just a pilot in Libya. That happened in '86, I think, when El Dorado Canyon, when Reagan bombed Libya for the bombing of a discotheque in Germany. We participated in that, but I was just I was a lieutenant commander flying, an F-14 at that time. So I didn't really have any part in the senior leadership of it. During Desert Storm, I was part of the air operations side of it. So, we were writing schedules and doing things that actually were combat ops in Desert Storm. Um, and then when I was Carrier Group 4, we actually trained all the battle groups deploying to go to Afghanistan and Iraq during that period of time. We did 5 carrier battle group trainings, and basically we would take my staff and the battle group of the deploying carrier, all the ships, usually 2 LA class submarines, an aircraft carrier, an oiler, 2 Burke destroyers, and a couple of Aegis cruisers. That would make up a battle group. We'd take them to sea, and we would go through all this training using an aggressor force that we also commanded, to attack them. So we basically did that training for the next 5 deploying battle groups, including, well, the first ship on the scene in Afghanistan was Enterprise. We didn't train them, but all the rest of them we did. So it is different, and there is a great deal of pressure, and you start to learn a little bit about what they call the fog of war. One of the things that was neat about Carrier Group 4 was that since we were running the aggressors and we were running the Blue Force, we call them Orange Force, and the Blue Force, so we knew what information as Orange Force we were providing to the battle group.
Got it.
And then we would go to their meetings and find out what they were aware of. And so the disconnect between what was really going on, because we were ground truth,
Right,
and what they thought was going on.
You guys know the difference, or
Yes.
what they're trying to sneak attack,
Right.
or what kind of strategy they have.
So the fog of war.
gotcha.
And you get to see how timing and what you know and when you know it all become really important on the success of the operation.
Right.
And so that's
That's interesting. That because and then how quick you can pivot on new information. It's like it's like we're not going to show them this. We're only going to show them this piece of data.
Yeah.
They're going to react based on that, and then when new data hits, how quickly can you respond to this new data?
Exactly. In fact, we typically would have in this scenario, we would have some event
Yeah.
that was meant to be the step between non-combat ops, just on-scene ops, and
Right.
then the trip to war, where okay, this happened. Now you're in a different set of ROE, rules of engagement, and now you're actually in a combat situation. And it was interesting. We had this all planned as the aggressor
Right.
guys about when that was going to happen. Didn't always happen that way. Sometimes it happened before that because the battle group made a different decision, and sometimes it happened, later than what we anticipated. So I think that it is a real interesting perspective, and it's one that AI is going to play a big role of in the future. Is understanding all these inputs, and
100%.
frankly, battle groups today have so many inputs. They have so much raw data coming in that it's almost impossible
Agreed.
to keep up with
Yes.
and know what's going on.
100%.
So we have always looked for ways to kind of filter through all that, and I think AI will play a role.
I think that's so true because I mean, what an advantage to AI, because the reality is like there's so many variables coming at you, and even as a business owner, you're like, I can have all this raw data everywhere, but I want a dashboard where I have KPIs that are important to me. Whatever is feeding into it is all the raw data, but I want strategic, actionable data. So, and it's kind of like, and what AI can do is take loads of data, and then with a bunch of history, you can now put it back in front of you with actionable, real, decision-making data, which is pretty cool because I think that is going to make a huge difference.
It does, and in fact, what you will find, I think, as we did, and not in different, probably business no different, that there's some little indicator back here that you should have paid attention to, and you may even go back through your notes and say, oh yeah, I remember we talked about that,
That was a bit of a red flag there, yeah.
but we didn't do anything about it.
Right.
So 3 or 4 days later, maybe a week, or depending on whether it's a business or what it is, but you say, oh, Yeah, that was it. That was the one
That
thing.
was what we needed to act on.
That's
right
the
there.
one we didn't act on.
Right.
And we would find that. We would insert some piece of information into their big battle problem that should have been, the gong should have gone off and said, "Oh, this is it. This is the one thing."
That's what we should have been
But it-
using from the start.
But it would be it'd get left in the morning brief. They would brief it and say, "Oh, okay, fine," and they go on and they would just forget about it. And I think there's so many things in business. I'm sure exactly the same.
Oh yeah, and I think that, and the sooner you can react on it's not just the KPI, it's the right indicator. It's because a lot of businesses will start to make decisions based on the wrong data or the wrong measurement, and then they're heading down the wrong path for a period of time, and the costs associated with that versus going back to where it was, picking the right indicator and reacting to that makes all the difference. You don't have to. You're either it's money or time, both. One of the things that I've always been curious about, like you're flying F-14s. One of these stories I heard was like, if you're in the dark landing on an aircraft carrier, the swells are big, and like they're measuring the heart rates of these pilots, and it's higher when you're trying to land on the aircraft carrier than when they're actually in a dogfight or in battle. And I guess tell me about your experience with landing on aircraft carriers. Like you experienced it firsthand. So what is that true? Is it like wild to
No, I think it is true. First of all, the Navy prepares you really well. You carrier qualify in almost every airplane you fly. So if you're going to have problems at the ship, it's well known before you get to you won't get to the F-14 carrier qualification if you're having troubles early on. But what I would tell you is this: daytime landing on the ship becomes sort of routine. And you're a pilot. You come in and when you're over the ocean, there's nothing around, just the ocean and this little ship out there and the horizon. But it becomes pretty easy because you have all these visual cues of where you are with regard to the ship, and it's not as difficult. The Navy landing is a very precise landing. It starts at about 3/4 of a mile. It's about a 500 to 600 minute rate of descent all the way to touchdown, and you never take power off. In fact, when you actually touch down, you add full power. And the wire catches you, and you add full power because the spool up time on the engine. If you miss the wire, you have to be able to have enough thrust on the airplane to take off.
Got it.
Okay, I was always wondering about that. I'm like, Jesus, man, but if that doesn't catch, you're diving in the ocean. I mean, okay,
You drive it. It's not you don't land. There's no flare.
Got it.
you're not losing lift.
No.
Like you could still have a speed that allows you to.
Yes.
Okay.
You fly the airplane in to the deck at 400 to 500 feet per minute rate of descent, and you don't do anything. You just fly it into the deck. It's designed to absorb that, and then if as soon as you touch down, you add full power. So my point is though that daytime flight ops become sort of routine because you got good visual references. It's just like flying any other airplane. You can see out, where the horizon is and all that. Nighttime is different in that there is sometimes no horizon. It's like, and you can go on YouTube and see some of these pictures that guys are taking today, but basically it's an inky blackness with this little ship out there that's it's a speck on your flight screen when you start off at the 3/4 mile point. So it doesn't become routine. And there's a discipline to it in that when you take off at night on the carrier, you know that you're going to come back and land there. So you got that thing that's out there. You know that if I don't land here,
you're already nervous leaving the ship.
it's not unusual, and I've had it, and most every pilot, if he's honest, will say that. But there's times when you land where the conditions are such that you feel weak-kneed when you get out of the airplane. It's like, I'm lucky to be here. That doesn't happen all the time. But nighttime flight ops is very challenging, and it's an instrument approach, and it's very disciplined, and it's basically you have to build up confidence, and it's not unlike, you'll see a pitcher, for example, who's on top of his game, and then he'll have some bad pitches, and it'll destroy his confidence, and for 2 or 3 games, he can't pitch.
100%. Yes.
flying off the ship's kind of the same. You'll see a guy have his, what they call it, a night in the barrel, because it's kind of inky blackness when you're flying around at night and there's no horizon and you're flying your instruments and you're trying to get back aboard and your fuel gauge is going down.
Yeah.
So it's very stressful. And sometimes a guy will go out there and he'll have a bad night, maybe bolter 3 or 4 times, maybe have to go to the tanker because he's run out of gas, come back, get aboard. They got to hold the whole flight deck open for you when they would like to have closed the flight deck so they could start the next launch. So they're waiting, everybody's waiting for you to land.
They're just like, yeah, right.
And you keep coming down and boltering. And it'll destroy their confidence. So, and maybe for 2 or 3 weeks, they may even struggle with night landings until they get their confidence back. So it's really a confidence factor. And in fact, I would say, and I think you and I have talked about this, flying is a skill. It's not unlike playing golf or playing tennis or anything else. You may have been the world's best golfer. You may have been the world's best tennis player, but if you haven't played the game in a month or 2, you are not very good. 100%. Same thing in aviation. You have to fly all the time. You got to be good. You got to stay on top of it, and you got to keep your confidence that you can do it. So it is very challenging, and it's the good thing now is the airplanes are getting easier to fly. The new airplanes have automatic systems that are much better than they were, and when I was flying, it's much better than it was like in the World War II guys.
Right.
I mean, they were out there.
It's like levels.
They had a turn needle and a ball indicator, and they're flying at night around the boat. I mean, they're in airplanes that were not very well instrumented and very difficult. My era was much better, but not as good as it is today.
Right.
That's wild. It's just to think about that. It's The Navy nuclear pipeline is one of the toughest programs in the military. How did going through that sharpen your thinking and leadership approach?
Well, I think the whole point of that program is to license for the CO to operate the reactor. And when Rickover started the nuclear Navy, which is in the 50s, when the first nuclear power plant went to sea in a submarine, Nautilus, I think. He was also a leader in the Department of Energy. And the Department of Energy was sort of saying, well, we'll come out and qualify your ships to operate. He says, no, you won't. We're going to do that ourselves. So this whole thing, this whole nuclear power program is taking, particularly on the enlisted side, really bright people. I mean, they're really smart guys. And they send them off to this school to learn how to operate a nuclear power plant. And the CO, me, I had been in the Navy at that point 20 years. I hadn't been in college for 20 years. When I was in college, we were using slide rules. Right. And when I went down to nuclear power school, they're all using computers and stuff like that. So it's very challenging, and it's where you start to learn. And the Navy nuclear power program is very much this way. You take people for their technical expertise, not their pay grade. And that's the way Rickover wanted it, and that's the way it is. He may not be the most senior guy, but if he's the smartest guy in the reactor department on that system, that's the guy you go to. Not the chief, not the lieutenant, but the first class or second class or whoever it is that's got the knowledge on that system. So I think it really goes into what we talked about before, is that the key to success in operating a plant, and what they teach you there, is that you got to have this really good group of people. They have to be highly trained, and they have to be managed in a way that allows them to do their job. And that's kind of the way it ran. And
good people, good training, and then proper management with accountability and ownership of the role that they're in. Yes. Okay. Yep.
And it was a challenging school for me, and even more so for others. I mean, I at least had calculus and things like that. Right. But there were guys in the program that were history majors. And not that they weren't smart guys. They just hadn't.
Without having an undergrad in engineering, I think it definitely would be. Yeah. That's a whole different.
In fact, we had a remedial couple of weeks where we did remedial math, and in fact, one of those funny stories is that when you get assigned to go to the nuclear power program, they give you a mentor. And mine was a guy, a well-known guy in the Navy who was a mentor, was my mentor. Really good guy. He'd been one of my COs, as a matter of fact, on a carrier.
No way. Okay.
And I knew him well, and he's a great guy. And so I went to see him, and I said, they selected me for the program. You're my mentor. And he says, well, let me tell you the story. It'll kind of give you the perception of how you should run your life from now on. And he said he went to nuke power school, and the tests there are like 4-hour exams, and they're no multiple choice. It's all essay, and there are no textbooks. You have to.
Oh, it's not open book. It's
all. There's no textbooks involved. They write on the board, and you take tests. And so he said that during one of his tests, they also tell you what you need to buy to to go through the school. So he's probably one of the history guys. I don't know what his major was in college, but anyway, he goes into his first test, and he's got these little pens that have the like 0.4 millimeter lead where you push on the top and the lid comes out. So he's writing on this exam, and about this into the second hour, he runs out of lead. So he takes the eraser off the end, and he pulls those little pieces of lead out, and he turns the pen around.
He's trying to shove it down the little.
He's got bifocals, of course, because he's an old guy,
Mm-hmm.
and he's trying to put that in there. This little ensign next to him, it's in the same school. You go to school with the ensigns that are right out of college,
Oh, I see.
From MIT or wherever they came from.
I gotcha.
And you're sitting there after 20 years of, flying airplanes and stuff, and you go, I don't know anything about this. And this guy reached over, grabbed the pen, put the eraser in, and hit it on the top, and the lead came out the bottom. And this guy, Jack, says, I knew right then that new power school was going to be a real challenge.
Yeah.
Because I don't even know how to, I couldn't make the pencil work.
Yeah, I had to I'm doing it the opposite way. That's pretty good. That's a good story. Oh, man. Okay, let's see here. After retiring, this is interesting too. I was like, after retiring from doing what you did on the aircraft carriers, you transitioned into leadership roles at Northrop Grumman, Lockheed, and other major defense organizations. Which leadership skills translated seamlessly into like corporate America big defense companies? This kind of and how did that transition kind of work? Like,
yeah, well, what was interesting about that is that so the carrier that I had command of was a Nimitz class aircraft carrier.
Okay.
They started with the Nimitz original carrier in the 60s, and they have a 50-year lifespan. So I retired from the Navy in 2004. And at that time, the Navy was building a new class of aircraft carrier called the Ford class.
Mm.
So what they were looking for was somebody that had experience with a Nimitz class, because the group that I went to was the R&D group for Northrop Grumman, and later it became Huntington Ingalls Industries, but it was Newport News Shipbuilding, and they built all the carriers in the U.S.
Yeah.
So they had this new program to develop and build the Ford class carrier, and the Ford class carrier had a certain number of requirements, like sortie rate and things that it had to be able to do. And the air wing that it had to do it with was a future air wing. The airplanes didn't exist, and the carrier didn't exist. So we developed a modeling and simulation capability to actually model the design and determine whether we'd meet those requirements. So what you were asking about is what they were looking for was somebody with experience on ships, not to run the company, but to tell us about ships and aircraft carriers and how they operated. Right. So I actually, when I went to Newport News Shipbuilding, I had a cadre of people who were right off the ship. I had an aircraft handler, I had an air boss, I had myself, who'd been a battle group commander and a carrier CO, I had an ordnance handling officer, I had all these people that had actually run departments on the ship.
Right.
So we basically advised the company and the Navy on what needed to be done in the design to make it better than Nimitz class.
that makes sense. Now that makes good sense. Yeah. So you have all these unique expertise that from that original like aircraft carrier, and then when they're doing these simulation designs, you're able to say no, that'll never, no, we want that bigger, we want that smaller, no, that she needs to be higher, or we need that. Okay. Yep.
That's exactly right. And there were a bunch of new technologies on Ford class, and so it was, how do you build a better carrier? And the Nimitz class is a very good carrier, but Ford class is better, about 25% better.
Okay.
And the 25% better is based on refinements in the design of Nimitz that were put into the design of Ford that make it a better sortie generator, make it work best with
More
fewer
efficient.
people.
Yeah.
Fewer people
Yeah.
was a big issue.
So you work in efficiencies, but then you also add technology that didn't exist when the Nimitz was. So you have these two revisions that are being made.
Yeah,
for
there were
that.
5 big new technologies, I think 5 or 6 in the Ford class.
Okay.
So it was pulling those all into a design and making sure that they worked the way the Navy wanted it to work.
All right. So this is I kind of alluded to this before, but you've been married since 1975, and you raised 3 children, and I've met all 3 of them, I believe. What allowed your family to stay strong despite deployments, command responsibilities, and constant pressure?
Well, I think it goes back to what we talked about, and it's kind of teamwork between your wife and yourself. Um, I said that wives have to be part of the team and they have to enjoy the Navy. And Marcia, my wife, her father had been a lieutenant commander in the Navy, and she spent much of her summers during growing up going. He was a reserve guy. He was in World War II, and then he went in the reserves, and he would do active duty in Pensacola and various places, And so her summers were basically going to these places with her father on what to her were vacations.
Right, but they were missions or deployment. Yeah, right.
So she kind of knew the Navy pretty well before she met me, and so I think she was a team player in that aspect, and I think that's what's important. I think the kids, um, I think they probably had some hard times when I was not there, but Marcia basically was able to run everything, and um, so I think it's doable. But there is a lot of it's just like anybody else. You have to kind of manage your time. The thing about the Navy that's somewhat different is that you don't have much choice. If once I went in the nuclear power program, that 6-year pipeline of sea duty and stuff was going to happen. If I was successful, I mean, it was going to happen.
Right.
So once you start that, then that's what's going to happen. She knew that,
Right.
and we did a lot of things to try to. For example, when I had the supply ship it was actually in New Jersey,
Yeah.
at Earl Weapons Station.
Yeah.
She would come up there on the
Right.
weekends. So, we weren't totally separated for the entire time that I was up there.
Or whatever
Yeah.
were. Yeah.
She came up there and she was in the antique business at the time. So that was a great antique spot there in
Right.
Pennsylvania.
Grab some supplies or grab some unique.
But I do think it is difficult. And I think military families have a real challenge in that regard because in some cases, and particularly recently where all these, Army guys now, they're on their 4th or 5th deployment overseas for long periods of time.
Yeah.
Our deployments were normally 6 months, and there was normally a 6-month period prior to that were workups, and you'd be gone about half of that time during that workup, and then you'd be gone the whole 6 months. During when the Iranian hostage crisis happened in '79, I was on deployment. I was actually coming home, and when they took the hostages, we redeployed to the Persian Gulf for another 4 months. So we made a 9-month. We were basically gone for 9 months on that deployment. Some of the deployments recently have been long too because we don't have as many carriers to do the rotations, and because of what's happening in like the Red Sea and stuff like that. So they're spending more than 6 months on deployment, which is tough.
Yeah, that is hard. Especially you got young kids. You get you're, and I think partly, I mean, when you're a provider, when you're the main breadwinner, and that's your career of choice, and you're doing it for the family. Like you're out here, building this career. You obviously it's for you're doing stuff that you're enjoying, but you're also in many ways doing a lot of these sacrifices of time away because you're doing it for the long-term benefit of your family. And I think that can sometimes get lost, but also maybe trying to be present when you are home. I think it's like you're not going to have as much quantity time, so when you are home, I think focusing your energies on being there.
Yeah. The other thing that I will tell you is that the Navy, and I think all the armed services do this, but there's a good support organization when you leave. I mean, like when I was carrier CO, actually when I was the XO, the CO was not married, so Marcia was sort of she was sort of the senior officer's spouse, and she ran the wives. She was involved with the people that stayed behind, the families, the wives. They had wives clubs. They did things, routinely. So there's there's support organizations. So they do a good job of building that. And I think that's different in the military than it is in the civilian world. The if you're in a squadron, you'll know every wife and all the kids of all the people in that squadron. It's a close knit family,
Right.
because the husbands are gone half the time, and the wives and the families get together and do things. So it's a very close knit.
That's nice.
Close knit organization.
Yeah.
And I did not see that, for example, in when I was
Grumman or and that's the thing. It's like, hey man, good luck. Yeah.
ends were your own. I had friends there that were Navy friends, and we became very close. But it's different than the civilian world in that it does involve the entire family.
No,
I think that that makes sense. Yeah, I don't think they do that in just in corporate America. Like if you're a part of a sales team and you're traveling all the time, and they don't try and connect the families to make sure the wives have a support system in place. Yeah. But so across flying, commanding, combat deployments, corporate leadership, what's the single most important principle that you believe every modern leader must master?
I think it's back to where we started. I think what I saw in the Navy is that you get to a point where your own skills are not adequate. In fact, one of my stories that I tell about being the CEO of this carrier is this: we had two operating rooms, we had a surgeon, chief medical officer, we had a medical department. We had 5 or 6 dentists. I mean, we had an entire medical capability. So the senior medical officer on board, when I was on the GW, he used to call me up, and I'd be up on the bridge watching flight ops, and he'd call me up and he'd say, "Hey, Captain, I've got Joe Blow down here, and he's got an elevated blood white count, and he's got some pain in the lower abdomen, and he's got this and this and this, and I think it's his appendix, and I'm going to operate." And I'd go, "Well, Doc," I said, "operate. I don't know. I don't know anything about appendix."
Are you asking for an approval here? I don't know what to say. Yeah.
Exactly what I was saying. "Are you asking me for approval?" And he says, "No, I just want to make sure that you don't do some drill or something that takes power out of the center. We used to do drills and take power out of the operating rooms and stuff." And he says, "I just want to make sure you knew I was doing this operation. I didn't want anything to happen." I said, "Okay, fine." Well, it sort of led me to this idea that I can't, I don't, somebody could come to me and ask me thousands of questions about something on the carrier, and I would say, "I don't know."
Right.
But I know who you need to talk to.
Right.
And this guy can tell you.
Right.
And I think I learned that very quickly in the Navy. And I think it's really the key to be a good leader is that you have to live some time in the life of in the shoes of your people that work for you. You have to understand their challenges, and you need to, invest in them and give them the resources and responsibility they need to carry out their duty. And then your job as a leader to be smart enough to know how it's going. Another visual I'll paint for you. My friend that I was telling you was the CEO of the TR, and I replaced him. He was the XO of the TR, and then I relieved him as the XO of the TR. So when you do that, there's about a 2 or 3 week turnover where you go and you walk around with him just to, he's the new guy.
Normal.
You meet all the people. So he told me as he was getting ready to leave, he says, "This job as the XO, it's like the guy on the Ed Sullivan Show." And you're too young to remember the Ed Sullivan Show, but he used to have these acts that would come on there, and there'd be this guy that had like pool cues mounted in these things on the stage, and he would put a plate up there and spin it up till it's spinning, and then he'd go over and do another one, and he would do another. And by the end of his little act, he'd have like
about 6 or 7 of them.
Yeah, there are about 30 of them, and you're watching because the one he did the first is starting to do this, and all of a sudden he'd go over and do that, and it would spin up again. And I said, "That's kind of the way it is being." He said, "That's the way the XO is. Everything, you spin everything up, you get it going, and then you got to be smart enough to know when something's about to go off the track,
Right.
and then go out and spin it up again."
Spin it up again.
That's kind of what your job was, and it was a great. I mean, I thought about that many times as the XO.
Right.
He's exactly right.
Right.
You'd go, geez, I haven't heard anything from.
I can't take my eye off that section for too long because something, I got to.
In fact, as a pilot, you'll recognize it. It's like a scan in a cockpit.
Right.
In fact, there were some problems that could exist in the F14 community where you would focus on one instrument, instead of having a scan.
Right.
And I think that you can draw a lot of parallels between running a large organization and actually flying an airplane. Is that okay? I haven't looked over here at the VSI in a while. I need to go check it to make sure my altimeter's telling me we're losing altitude. I need to go check this.
Right.
And so the CEO, I think, has got to be smart enough to say, I haven't talked to, or the CEO of the ship, I haven't talked to the weapons department. I need to go over
get an
there
update,
and
see
find
where
out
we're
what's going on in the weapons
Yes,
department.
That's true.
So
Yeah.
I think that's the thing I learned, and I think that's really big in the military system, whether it's Navy, Army.
Right.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's irrelevant. I think the principles that's the thing about once you like leadership principles or managing people or processes or companies. I mean, you can once you get a handle on it, have some experience in a certain area, and you can translate that into all sorts of areas. And I think that's kind of a powerful thing. You don't have to relearn it somewhere else. You can kind of it translates into other areas of your life.
Well, and I think it's important to know that at some point the organization gets too big for you to know everything.
Mm.
And it's that point where you need to delegate and understand and start to talk to the people that do
Right.
know everything.
Exactly.
And that happens probably around the squadron level. About at that level, you pretty much had all the jobs in the squadron. You know how to do all that.
Right.
But you go to be the carrier CO and you got this surgeon working for you that's calling you about an appendix, and you don't know anything about
I
appendix.
never went to med school.
And
no idea.
There's a whole bunch of other people on there that are doing things that you don't really know everything that they need to know.
Right.
But you know who they are,
Mhm.
and you know how to go get the information, and you know how to
Exactly.
check on what they're doing. And
Yeah.
I think that's the issue.
Okay, I appreciate that. So, closing question: when you look back at your entire life, from the cockpit to command to raising a family, what do you now understand about leadership, purpose, and legacy that you wish you had known at the beginning?
Well, I think there's so much that you don't know when you start.
Mm.
I mean, in fact, it's difficult not to know the answer to the question. It's even to know the question.
Yes. That's
I
so
mean,
true.
I look back on that, I go, there were so many things that I didn't know or understand, and it's kind of there. You're not smart enough to know what you don't know.
Yes.
So I guess the big deal I would say at the end of the line is, maybe it's why we should pay more attention to our elders. They
Mm.
really have got some life experiences that we haven't had, and there's people that are older than me that I feel the same way about. You can't possibly learn it all. When you come through, you learn mostly by making mistakes, and hopefully you don't make enough mistakes to be unsuccessful. But
Mm.
so I guess the idea is that you can't possibly know. I've got some grandsons now that are trying to, getting started in the world about what they want to do, and it's so hard because you don't really know what you want to do
Right.
or what the requirements are for any of these things. So you just have to. I think it's a one step at a time process, and recognizing that your goals will start to focus as you go forward.
I like that.
You
Just
Keep moving forward, and things will become clear. But you got to keep moving
Yes.
and learning. And
I would say as a lieutenant, I
Yeah.
had no appreciation or really any real drive to be the CO of a squadron. I looked at him and go, I couldn't possibly be
Yeah.
a CO.
Right.
I don't know what
Right.
that guy knows.
Right.
But then about the time you're a lieutenant commander and you've done a couple of crews, you go, yeah,
it's not that far away.
that'd be
anymore.
okay. I could do
Yeah,
that. And the
that's
same
true.
thing with the carrier.
Yeah.
When I was a JO on the carrier, I had no clue who the CO was, and I would, if I
Right.
met him, and I might recognize him in the passageway, but I had no ambition to do that. But as I went along, after an XO tour, going, yeah, I want to do that.
Yeah.
So I think the point is that you're your goals focus as you mature, and you need to make sure that you're on a pathway that allows that to happen and keep moving forward.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. Yeah, because I think a lot of times you can't see because you're climbing a small mountain, and then when you get to the top, then you see more opportunities. But if you're just stuck on the side of a mountain and you're not going anywhere, you're never going to see that next opportunity. So if you keep climbing, you'll see another vision, and then you climb the next little mountain, and then over top, you're like, oh shit, I never even knew this opportunity existed. So I like that. I like that idea. Well, listen, I appreciate it. It was fun chatting. We're gonna close her out, but thanks for your service, and we'll see you at the lake at some point. Sounds like you got a little project going on there,
Yep.
perhaps. Excited about that. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching and listening in. American Legacy is a production of Perfect Fit USA. Copyright 2025 by Perfect Fit USA. To learn more about Perfect Fit and the Perfect Fit family of companies, please visit perfectfitusa.com.